What normal thing in your childhood did you later realize was extremely weird? My mom used to have me practice screaming for help at the top of my lungs before going to friends' houses A couple. When I was a kid, my dad would take me to the 7-Eleven for Slurpees. I adored it, because I loved Slurpees. The only rule was I couldn't tell my mom I got it or went anywhere. I didn't realize until I was about 12 or so that all the times he took me out for Slurpees was really just him getting liquor and feeding his alcoholism, and that's why I wasn't allowed to say anything. My mom also slept with me well into my teen years. It wasn't until I got into late middle school that I mentioned it, and my friends thought it was extremely weird. My dad told me it was because my mom was a control freak, and that I was putting a wedge in their marriage by letting her sleep with me, so I finally demanded she stop. I later found out she slept with me for that long because my dad was a raging junkie, alcoholic, and could do some really terrible things while high. I knew my dad was an addict, but I never knew my dad could do anything like that. I take care of my mom now. He died about 6 years ago and I've never seen her happier. Edit, for those wondering, I am a daughter. My Christian family used to celebrate Passover, as in, glass of wine out for Elijah, youngest kid asking ritual questions, ceremonial plates, the whole Seder package. Sometimes we did this as guests at a Jewish friend's house, but at least once, my very Methodist mother cooked a full authentic Seder menu in our house. I knew not everyone did this, but all my Jewish friends at school did, so I didn't think much of it. Then I transferred to a Catholic school and was shocked that most kids knew nothing at all about Judaism. The cute twist is that my parents had met at a Seder when they lived in NYC in the 1980s. One of Dad's law school friends was roommates with a co-worker of Mom's. The roommates co-hosted a Seder and decided to invite their Gentile friends to make it a bigger party. The more the merrier. And so a Methodist and a Catholic sat together, got to talking, swapped numbers, went on a date, went on more dates, got married, and produced 2 kids. They had us celebrate Passover because it was a part of their story, and our origin stories. I think I only thought about this once, then completely forgot about it. When I was a kid, 6-7, I used to think brown people pooped brown poop, and white people pooped white poop. It never occurred to me that I had never seen a white shed any time I went to the toilet. And so when I saw that someone had unfortunately forgot to flush the toilet at school, and I saw the remnants, I was immediately intrigued, since I was the only brown kid at that school, and I thought there was another brown person at my school, and I just hadn't seen them. My parents didn't want to shout our names for dinner or to come downstairs, so my dad installed a little doorbell in our bedrooms. So if we were needed in the kitchen, we were summoned by the child bell. We lived in a 2-bed semi-edit. My dad passed when I was younger, so thank you for the love of his unique idea. Everyone in my family is very petty and emotionally immature. No one apologizes or talks about how they feel. Things you said a month ago can come back up anytime. Unsurprisingly, I get super freaked out when people raise their voice at me, even if it's to agree, and I apologize constantly. I've posted this before, but I had a babysitter when I was younger. I'm a boy and was about 8 or 9 at the time, who used to make me pretend to be pregnant and would often act out fetishes she had with me involving my feet or just touching my genitals. At the time, it didn't necessarily feel wrong, and more like a secret we had together. I think I was also more naive because she was only a 15-year-old girl, and I had always learned that older men were the ones to be careful around. I thought that it was normal to expect to be physically harmed when someone was mad at you, until I was a teen. My mom would beat me when she got mad, which was pretty often. Also, I thought that mistakes were unacceptable, because I'd be beaten for even the smallest of mistakes. Burger roulette. Every time there was a barbecue or we made burgers, one of the burgers would be stuffed with hot sauce and peppers. So hilarious, and definitely made dinners more exciting, but not a normal thing lol. Edit. Well, this blew up. Thanks for the awards. If you're going to do this, just remember that everyone should know that they're playing so that you don't get into legal trouble. It's a little thing, but it was very surprising to me that it was my dad and not my mom who stayed home with me when I was sick. Also, my friends all had stories of their parents trying to get them to go to school even when they were sick. My parents never did that, and even let me stay home a few times even when they knew I was faking it. I know it's hard for a lot of working parents to stay home with a sick kid, but all my friends at the time were pretty much from the same middle-class background as I was, and my father was a hospital physician and the head of his division at the hospital and also saw a lot of patients, so it was not easy for him to miss work. I guess he handled a lot of stuff by phone. This was before the internet. It's a little thing, but it really made me feel so cared for, and I still associate staying home sick with getting taken care of by my dad, who had an excellent bedside manner. Edit. I just want to add that I found, later, that my father had kept charts for all my childhood illnesses, tracking fever, symptoms, medications and dosages, etc., including the fake ones. Random kids living at our house. I had 9 siblings and my parents always had 1 or 2 other kids that had been kicked out of their homes living with us, usually friends of my older brothers and sisters. It wasn't until my 20s that I discovered that most had been disowned by their parents for being gay. Also had no clue that this wasn't normal for the 60s. No vacations. We never went anywhere for summer or holiday breaks, except for 1 year when I was 8, when we took a road trip up to Washington State. The experiment was never repeated. My parents never said why. I think that basically my father did not want to take us on vacation, so we didn't go. No reading for pleasure. It was okay to pore over the books for homework, but not okay to lounge on a chair or bed and read for pleasure. My father would go nuts if he caught us. To him, it meant we weren't doing housework or yard work, which is what he really wanted us to do when the school assignments and chores were done. Getting honked at, flipped off, and yelled at while driving. I just thought driving was this extremely aggressive and negative experience that made everyone angry. Turns out my dad was a serial tailgater who used to ride right up on people's asses in front of us, regardless of the speed we were traveling. Highways, subdivisions, country roads, didn't matter. It wasn't until I began to learn to drive myself that it all made sense. Apparently most families don't have 3 children born with only a 1-year age gaps between them. Before university I was convinced that our family was the standard and that siblings born more than 3 years apart were the outliers. But since coming to college, every time I tell people my siblings are all a year apart I get something to the effect of, "Oh my God, your poor mother." My mom and my brother like each other a lot. Once I walked in on them hugging in bed. My brother died at 15 and she called him the love of her life at his funeral. No one batted an eye at this, so I didn't either. My mom later told my dad a secret about her and he filed for divorce and custody of me the next day. They asked me all sorts of questions about being touched by either of them in the custody hearing, and my mom just told me it was my dad's way of taking me from her. I was 13 by then. That same year one came out to my mom as gay. She was super upset, but not in the usual mom way, although I didn't know that at the time. It was more like the someone who just got broken up with way. Also she had a teenage cousin who everyone said was a really good-looking fellow, and she kept his photo on the fridge and when it disappeared, it had fallen off and was under the fridge. She had a nervous breakdown. Not an exaggeration. She had to see a therapist after and was very distant after that. She was totally a shit mother before all of that is factored in, but I never put any of the pieces together until I was about 30, I guess. Now a lot of the things she did make much more sense. She didn't see me as her kid, so she didn't treat me like one. Luckily for me, it never got to the point where she physically abused me, but my brother basically beat the shit out of me on a regular basis and would do some really fucked up shit to me, like shoot me repeatedly with a BB gun or stab me with a steak knife. My mom didn't care. Now I know why. I can say most of my childhood was like this due to being in an abusive home, but one of the things that were straight up weird was the constant hopping from home to home to home to home. We wouldn't stay in one place more than a year, and apparently that's not normal. I only found out later that my step-grandfather was wanted for something, and now I wonder if we were ever actually living in those places via rent or if we were squatting. Eating walnut makes your mouth burn. Every time I eat anything with walnut, was burning my palate, gums and tongue for a while after. It was like that from day one of my life, and I thought it's normal. You eat cake, your mouth burn. It's a package deal. Never questioned or mentioned that to anyone. I just assumed that's normal. I was in mid-30s and my brother mentioned that he had allergic reaction to walnut, and that his mouth were burning, so he had to go to Dr. ASAP. It took me 30+ years to find out that I have walnut allergy to some degree. I still eat it. When I was 8, our teacher made up a whole story about how he was dating a mermaid. He showed letters and trinkets and everybody in class believed him. I have to add, we lived in a small town close to the North Sea, and there is a lot of merman folklore in that part of the Netherlands. We must have told our parents, but everybody kept it up. The teacher managed to stick to the story pretty much the whole school year. Can't really remember how he told us that it was just a story, but to this day I feel that it was such a weird thing to do. Edit, spelling mistake, edit 2, THNX for the award. My mom and her GF would make my sister and I regularly pee in a cup. I was about 13, she was around 11, and tell us it's to make sure we weren't doing drugs. Very strict household. 10 years later, my mom's GF got pretty drunk and finally confessed to us they were both using our urine to pass their own drugs tests. I grew up in a flashpoint area in Northern Ireland in the 80s, so basically army checkpoints, bombings, riots, etc. It was kind of exciting as a kid. Our town was bombed a few times. Occasionally we would get to see full military deployment in our housing estate. Now as an adult, I can see I basically grew up in a war zone where indiscriminate violence and civilian casualties was normalized. Probably this is less weird, and more deeply fucked up. My parents had us drink the water we boiled corn in. When I told my friends at school I drank corn broth, they said that isn't a thing. They had us drink that instead of normal water since it had some flavor and we didn't like plain water. I didn't realize most families didn't have 3 different cars until I shifted to public school. I didn't realize how well off we actually were because in private school I was one of the poor kids. My family is upper class, but my friends had literal mansions and servants. One guy I'm still friends with got an airplane for Christmas from his dad. An airplane. My sister used to be super competitive about how fast she could put her makeup on. I remember thinking it was normal since girls' makeup, boys' video games was the big mentality in the early 2000s. It got to a point where my mom banned makeup because one of my younger sisters made a huge mess with it in the kitchen on her expensive kitchen table. Being subjected to an extremely passive-aggressive judgmental circle jerk by my dad's family for the smallest things. My grandmother would make a strawberry side dish with every family dinner we had. I hated strawberries, but I could never outright say I don't like strawberries to avoid being forced to take some. If I didn't find some polite way out of it, they'd say, "Oh, she doesn't want any because she doesn't like it," in an overly mocking tone. and talk about it with each other directly in front of me like it was some terrible character flaw. Or if I forgot to close a cabinet all the way, "Oh random cousin, could you close the door for Falcon, otherwise she decided she wants to be lazy today and forgot that adults close doors behind them." It was always said in an overly sweet way. I thought all extended families were like this and was always overly polite and watched every word I said when I was with my mom's family, or met my friends' families because, in my experience, family meant constant passive-aggressive criticism. I talked with my mom's relatives after lots of therapy and cutting my dad's family out of my life, and, holy shit, they're actually really cool people. My mom's cooking. She boiled noodles until they were mush. Her potato soup was boiled onions and potatoes drained and added to warm milk with salt and pepper. Baked beans were beans, ketchup, and pancake syrup. The most common meal in our house started as spaghetti, then became chili, and then chili mac. Vegetable soup was all the vegetables dumped straight from a can with no seasoning, and the meat would be hamburger, canned roast beef, or canned corned beef with potatoes. A lot of the other stuff she cooked was pretty good, but that was only if she followed a recipe. If she winged it, things got strange. My favorite will always be the grape soda BBQ because she didn't have Dr. Pepper. Getting along great with my parents and being proud of my family members, and randomly bringing people home to meet the family and hang out. I found out my coworker hadn't had a home-cooked meal in a while, lived rural in employee dorm-like housing, and brought him home to meet my family and eat good food. It took a good bit of convincing him that meeting my parents wasn't a big deal. They're cool folk and fun to be around and were always inviting people over. Then we started dating and I married him. He finally understands why bringing random folk home for a good home-cooked meal is totally normal to me. He still thinks it's a little odd how inviting we are to everyone, but he at least gets it. I grew up in a very rural place. I remember one of my friends showed up at my house when I was like maybe 7 or 8. He had a BB gun with him, and asked if I wanted to go shoot people's cars. I said sure, got my own BB gun. Then we walked over to the park, which was just a field, and just started shooting at cars. It was very normal. There were other adults there who saw us and started betting on us if we could hit things. One guy said he would give me $5 if I could hit his license plate from 30 yards. I couldn't. Years later I moved to a big city and was shocked you couldn't walk around with a rifle and shoot things. As a temperamental, rather prone to sickness crumb snatcher, I would receive the home remedy from my mother of hot brandy and honey. I recently had to make sure that my half-sister understood that quieting unruly kids down with booze is not normal or cool. I had an alcoholic neighbor who abused his wife. He threatened to shoot our dog when it got out and ran in his yard and yelled at my sister who was trying to get the dog, who must have been 10 at the time. My nana stormed over there and told him off. His wife ended up leaving him. I never really saw him leave the house much, and he put these spikes up in his front yard to deter the neighborhood kids from stepping on his lawn. I guess he'd do a lot of petty things like that. I was never scared of him, but looking back, I'm glad he was at least smart enough to not actually try to put his hands on any of us kids, because my dad and neighbors would have beat his ass. My dad's low-key alcoholism meant that he was always drinking something alcoholic, from the bourbon in his coffee in the morning until falling asleep drunk in an easy chair at night. I never saw him driving without a beer or a soda pop-sized bottle of wine tucked between his legs, not even once. My dad left our family when my mom was pregnant with me. He went to be with his mistress for good and turned to alcohol. Well, on some nights my dad would show up at our home uninvited and unannounced, always drunk, and always crying. My mom would let him in, and he would come lay in bed with my brother or I, and just sob. My mom would let him sober up and then he would leave in the morning. I learned from my mom that if my dad wasn't going to be heavily involved in my brothers or my life, she would allow him to at least spend his time with us, even if it was when he was drunk, because this was better than nothing. Sorry, the wall of text. TLDR. My dad would show up to my house to come cry and sleep in our bed. My dad didn't want to be one of those dads shouting our names wherever he need to call us. He would whistle like how you whistle for a dog, like we had our own pitches and everything, but apparently I found out in adulthood is actually quite considered rude to whistle at people when you want their attention. Me and my brother still whistle at each other in the store if we go together and get separated.